Hello, everyone. My name is Amigo Wade. I am the director of an agency in Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, that's called the Division of Legislative Services. Just by way of background, Virginia's General Assembly is a bicameral legislature that has 40 senators and 100 delegates. My agency provides nonpartisan legal services for both of those entities. So just in terms of background or overview, there are really two agencies that are involved. We have the Division of Legislative Automated Systems, or DLAS, and it administers something that's called the Legislative Information System. They're the technology people that set up this system that is like the online public-facing part of the Virginia legislature. My agency is the Division of Legislative Services. I have to always say that because people get the two agencies mixed up. But if we're not the people to ask technical questions to, that would be DLAS. So as I said, my agency provides legal counsel. From the overall standpoint, what that means is when a member wants legislation drafted to be introduced, they would contact my agency and we'll separate it into subject matter areas, and then I would assign it to the subject matter area. We administer a confidential bill drafting system. What that means is that any legislative draft request is confidential, and we're not able to tell anyone what has been requested. It doesn't exist until they actually introduce it. So we draft legislation for introduction, as well as once the session has started, we draft amendments, be they line amendments or full amendments in the nature of a substitute. So that's sort of the background information. The next slide, I just want to show you a picture of what that public facing, this is the landing page for the Legislative Information System. If you look here, bills and resolutions, if you clicked on that, that will tell you a listing of all the bills that have been introduced by subject matter area, which would mean by the committee that it has been introduced to. Didn't have a lot of time to be able to go into the legislative process, but generally that's what that landing page looks like. Now, so I think what I want to talk about is how we have gone from basically being all hard copy, that nasty paper that no one wants to deal with now, to being mostly digital or I guess electronic. For us, it began really in 2011. So if you look at it this way, first you have the draft request, which is a whole process where you request a piece of legislation to be drafted. My agency drafts it, and then the session begins. These draft requests usually come in November, December. The session is in the first week in January, either for 45 days or 60 days. So November, December, we're in this drafting mode. As of 2011, that was the first year that people could make electronic legislative draft requests. They could go into the bill drafting system and request legislation to be drafted electronically. Before that, you had to do the old thing. You had to crank up the phone and call or send an email or send a letter. The next year, we started the electronic introduction of legislation, which is, okay, now you have the legislation that's been drafted, it's in this system. Then members could press a button, and that button would introduce the legislation or send it over to the clerk's office for introduction. So we've been able to do that since 2020. Now, mind you, during the session, everything goes back to paper. If there's an amendment or a substitute that has to be taken up, we had to bring 50 copies of it. Members would have bill books. So we had things electronic up to the point of of introducing the legislation. Then in 2014, we expanded the ability for non-legislative requesters to make electronic requests. So it's not just for the 140 members, we also draft requests for the governor and the executive branch, as well as the judicial branch, and as well as other independent agencies. If you ever wanted to give me a few more minutes, I could tell you all about Virginia, but then you would probably be bored to death. So now we're looking at, so that's how the request came in. It's going fast forwarding a little more. Beginning in 2018, the House of Delegates began live streaming all of its meetings. So, and with that, the public had the option of attending virtually. So this sort of changes the dynamic. Before that, I used to call it the hind parts, controller, which meant you had to get off your hind parts and come down to the session if you wanted to see what was going on. The public would sit in the committee meetings, they would hear the conversations, but beginning in 2018, at least with the House, all of the meetings would be live streamed virtually. So you could sit at home and watch the meeting. Now, this created a problem because, just in terms of what I call equality of public access, because if you were in the meeting, when you were there as a member of the public and someone brought up an amendment or a substitute, we would have copies to pass out. And if you were there, you would get a copy. But if you were attending virtually, you couldn't, you were missing part of the experience. So as a part of that, we started offering amendments and substitutes electronically. And we started doing that actually in 2019. And what the objective there was basically to sort of equalize the access and participation process. Virginia is a very big state, a very diverse state. So it was making it so that, there are some parts of Virginia that are closer to 4 other state capitals than they are to Richmond, which is the capital of Virginia. So going forward again, this is what the screen would look like if you were looking at a particular bill. This is House Bill 50. If you went to that bill, and let's say that we were in the meeting and a member said, I would like to offer this line amendment, then it would show up on this screen if you were watching from home, and you would be able to click on it, and this is what you would see, basically what that amendment is. So now you have this virtual experience. Now, mind you, that's just the House that did that. It wasn't the Senate, and this was all before the pandemic. So then you have the situation of, okay, now the pandemic happens. So our 2 legislative bodies took different approaches. The House of Delegates met all virtually. The members were in their homes or wherever they were, but they met all virtually. Now, mind you, they were a little bit ahead of the game because they had already started, presenting bills and substitutes online. So it was less of a change for them. What the Senate did was they met at one place, at the Science Museum, but all access was virtually. So with that, we changed the process so that all amendments were being offered basically online and virtually, because you didn't have anyone in public. So now we sort of fast forward again. I just give you an idea of how the situation sort of changes. We had to learn some lessons from that, because remember when I told you that that things were confidential. When a member asked me to request a piece of legislation, there's attorney-client privilege. I cannot tell any other member about it unless that member gives me the permission to do that. So you had a situation where let's say you have that House Bill 50, and you may have 4 other members that may want to do an amendment to it, but they may not want anyone to know about it because they may decide at the last minute, I don't think I want to do it, or I don't want anyone else to know about it. So we're in a position of knowing that, hey, there are 4 other amendments, and our rule is that amendment doesn't even exist, until that member says, go ahead, I want to go ahead and introduce it. So there was always that whole dynamic of, we knew what amendments were possible, but we had to wait until it was actually, we were given permission to release them. In real time, it's one thing if you're standing there and you have like a piece of paper and you're just kind of waiting, you're kind of hiding it behind your back, and they say, go ahead and pass it out. It's another thing if you're, everyone's participating virtually and you're waiting to see, okay, to press a button to release it. So that was an issue. In terms of the timing of the release, things happen a lot faster. You didn't have to wait until things were passed around, but everyone had almost immediate access once it was released. Then you had limitations of technology. We have parts of the state that don't have good, the most important word was broadband. We also had situations where, people would lose feeds. And what the law said at that point was, if you lost virtual access, you had to shut down the meeting until you had sustained it. But probably one of the one of the things I call the paradox of all virtual public access is, you remember I said it at the beginning, you know, the hind parts continuum or controller, which is people would have to get off of their hind parts, get into their car and drive downtown or drive to participate. Well, you know, when people can participate virtually, much like, you know, participating, you know, with social media, it's a lot easier to get participation, but quantity does not always equate into quality. We had a lot more situations where people were not adding, were not giving much value added to the conversation. So things were, in my view, things were said to be a lot meaner. It's a lot easier to sit on your couch and say something than it is to be in a room full of people and say something. So so that was one of the issues, just this idea of access, or just making access wide, does not necessarily equate to, you know, better participation. So with that, I know it was sort of a whirlwind, but if there are any questions, I can certainly answer them. And I should have said, I've been with this agency for 25 years, started as a staff attorney and managed to hang around until they didn't have anyone else left to make director but me, so.